Thank you all for coming. I'm going to do something a little bit different tonight before we get started. We've been talking for a couple of days, and I'd like to introduce or get new people to introduce themselves every time we have a get-together. Because sometimes people can live here 3 or 4 years, and unless you live next door, nobody knows who they are. I'm going to start with Eva. Would you tell us who you are and where you live?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Eva Sackle. This is my daughter, Lila. My husband, Lou, and I, and our little guy, Lewis, who's not here because he's 2 and full of energy, we just moved on Route 9, the Cluett house. We just moved about 2.5 months ago, and we're really thrilled to be a part of the village. We absolutely love it so far, and we're having no, we absolutely love it, and it's something completely unique that we've never seen in all of our house hunting years. So we're really happy to be a part of it.
Thank you. There's 2 more that I know about. Both happen to be in my family. Cody Young. Cody grew up here, but she and Bill have just bought a house just off the circle and given us our new great-grandson who's sitting right here with his dad. His name is Augie. And the other one is my grandson, Gus. Gus bought Shannon's house over on the ridge, was it 14 Prospect?
Yeah.
Okay.
Mr. Knapp's house. Mr. Knapp.
Pardon me?
Mr. Knapp's house.
Mr. Knapp's house. Yeah. Depending on how old you are, Mr. Knapp's house. Anybody else less than, say, 5 years? Would you please?
I'm Todd, this is my wife Sarah McDonald. We moved in 2.5 years ago, roughly, right in between the Petersons and the Petersons. It's the yellow house right on Andrews Ave. So, yeah, we've been here for a couple of years, made it to a couple of these types of events. It's just been, very hectic with a lot of my friends getting married, but hopefully we'll be able to make it to a lot more. So.
Good. Thank you.
And the funny thing about that too, Bill, is that's Mr. Knapp's house.
Pardon?
Mrs.
Knapp's not around.
Anyone else?
Well, I've been here a long time, but Bob and I celebrated our first wedding anniversary.
John Albrecht, I just retired and I'm down at 9 2nd Street with my sister.
Anyone else? I like to know whose house you're living in. We got the 20-year rule. It can't be yours until you live there 20 years. But people are not the least bit interested that you live on 21 First Street or 6 George, because nobody knows where that is. If you tell me I live in Mr. Knapp's house, that's good. Because we know. And nobody's going to be happy talking to you for very long. They're going to be all edgy till they find out where it is. Tonight, we're going to talk and look. And you'll notice our look is a little bit different. The historian's office has finally got into, I'd say, the 20th century now. I don't know that we're at the 21st century yet, but as far as me doing a PowerPoint program, I'm going to take all the credit for it. But I know none of you would believe that. That is the 2 deputy historians, Mike Rotes and Scott. Where'd you go?
Right behind. Where'd you go? I'm right behind.
Wrigley.
I'm listening.
I am up to this. Written notes. What you're looking at is a picture of the 1921 fire. That just sort of went up first. That'll work in a little bit later. For the folks.
Can I stop you for 1 minute?
Yes.
I just need to get 2 chairs. And I'm going to cause more of a commotion trying to do it quietly. I can't
Okay, I'm not sure what you said, but it's fine with me. Those guys are good. Also, while Diane is holding us up, Diane was in charge of running this whole thing. And
Years and he doesn't know my name.
Because you don't live in Mr. Knapp's house.
I thought I said Danielle, no? Anyway, Danielle, good job. We talked a little bit about order, what we're going to do tonight, and a little bit of ancient history first, especially for new folks. Some of you have already heard it. Why is Round Lake here? We aren't on a crossroads. There was never a business here. There was no industry here. Round Lake was a planned community, and that's kind of modern when you think about it. We started out with a map and a grid, streets laid out from day one, and had a sewer system probably from like, I'm going to say day 3, but really it was a few years more. Why'd they come here? Civil War was over. Just recently in the UK, around Tower London, they put 800,000 flowers in the moat because that was the number of people that were killed from the Empire in World War I. Civil War, 600,000. It was over, they didn't come home, cities were in disrepair. People were saying, you know, something really, really went wrong. And I think they started looking for some kind of way to make themselves feel good, to get together with people, because they all suffered the same thing. Because units in the Civil War were organized by geographic area. If there was a battle and 1,000 guys got killed, if that unit happened to be from Saratoga, they were all from Saratoga. So everybody there lost somebody. The people that came here, everybody here lost somebody. Cities were dirty, they were in disrepair. The early advertising for the association, they kept stressing how clean it was here, how good the air was, how pristine the whole thing was. The water, they said, was fantastic. All of those things weren't true in the big cities, even the small cities, because there wasn't anybody there to take care of it during the war. So that was the big push to come here. Someplace where you could get together with people who shared your experience. They had 2 things in common. They were probably Methodist. They probably had lost somebody in the Civil War, and where they lived was not particularly nice. The early folks that came here weren't as affluent as the folks that came later. So they only came for like a few days at a time. I mean, there was up to 20,000 here a couple of times. But that's why they came here. Liked it, started drawing bigger crowds, started building little houses first, and then gradually bigger and bigger. We turned into a community, and that's where we're going to pick up from tonight. It's the buildings that aren't here anymore. I mean, do whatever magic it is you do. That's the Woodlawn. It replaced an earlier hotel. It was across the park in front of us, Roe Park, but on the other end facing the railroad station. Don't have a whole lot of details on that. It burned twice. The first time it wasn't called the Woodlawn. I gotta put my glasses back on if I can find them. Nope.
Diane has
I got it. I didn't write big enough, Fred. What, no nasty comment?
No nasty. Oh. Bill, which side of the railroad track? This side or this side?
Pardon?
Which side of the this side of the railroad track?
Yeah, this side of the railroad tracks right across the whole lawn. I didn't write the other name down. Parkfield. It was there until 1892. After that, Ellis Rowe, who had the house to the right, it's still there. He's the guy who, after the 21 fire, bought everything, donated it back to the village and the library, etc. But before he did that, he bought this particular piece of property because there were still foundations and things there, and he didn't like it. Ellis did not like a lot of things. And he bought that property, made a lawn out of it. It's very ornate. We got another picture of that, or was that one that...
We do.
Side view?
Yep.
These are drawings, by the way. They're not photographs. So it went back quite a ways. Really neat building. And the next one?
You ready?
That was a railroad station. The railroad station at the end of Roe Park, just across the street, it was corrugated iron. And when I remember it, it didn't have, no, that doesn't work, does it? It didn't have these wings on the end. It was just a building in the tower. It was made out of corrugated iron. At the time it was built, it was like the biggest one on Rensselaer and Saratoga Railroad. It went on until they stopped running trains. It got torn down because actually it was rusting away. It was a really neat building. My family came here in 1946. The war was just over. Comic books and all that stuff were still on war and espionage and spies and secrets and all that stuff. We used to go look in the window on this side, down toward the tower. That's where the station master was. And at night, he'd have an envelope that he was stuffing all these pieces of paper in, close it, light a candle, drip wax on it, and put a stamp on it. Because the railroad did stuff like that. We didn't know that. We thought that guy had to be a spy of some kind. Secret stuff. The way the mail got delivered is trains didn't necessarily stop. If they stopped, they just threw the mail off. Because there were mail cars and mail was sorted en route. Like if somebody mailed something from Saratoga to Round Lake, they sorted that, we got it. You could get a letter from Saratoga 15 minutes later. It was that kind of quick. If the train wasn't going to stop in Round Lake, they just opened the door and winged the bag out. Outgoing mail got hung on a post that's farther down here, and they swung an arm out over the tracks, and the mail car had a matching arm, and at full speed, they just grabbed that and took off with it and never stopped. They sometimes ripped. We used to stand around and watch them do it to see if it was going to rip. Never saw them. Put pennies on the tracks. On this side, about where the tower is, there was a hook on the wall and a lantern. And when the station was closed, if you wanted a train to stop that was going through at night, you jacked up the shade, lit the lantern, and you hung it out on another post so that the engineer would see it and they would stop and pick you up. That sounds good in theory, but I can't imagine them doing it all the time. Trains, probably 20 a day in the heyday. I gotta do something different on that.
Was it made of brick?
Yeah, maybe I could get
Was it made of brick? No, it was a
my engineer to
corrugated steel.
What about the walls?
put stuff
corrugated
down so I could read it off the board. As I mentioned, the wings went first, and then they took the rest of the thing down. First job my son ever had, Bill, who's in his mid-50s now, he was 5. And gives you an idea how we thought back then. Bill and his buddy, Ed Rich, first job they ever had, they were tearing up the tracks, and Bill and Ed got paid, I don't know, a couple of cents a piece to pick up the spikes. This machine came along and pulled the rails up and threw the spikes on the ground. They paid the boys a couple of cents a piece to pick them up. It sounds okay till you think, would you let your 5-year-old today, living down where we do, just say, okay, sure, go ahead, go on up the tracks, no problem. Never thought a bit about it.
I'm not always
I'm not exactly sure where the tracks and the train station were. Is that where the bike path is now?
Okay.
or-
My age.
The next
The bike
slide.
path, I should stop calling it the tracks. This side, the south side of the bike path. There's a sign there now that says, welcome to Round Lake, don't pick the flowers, that one.
So,
That was the end of the station.
Oh, okay.
And it went from there south.
It's right up
So-
there.
Ah,
yeah, so,
yeah, on the right-hand side, you see that rectangle?
Yeah.
Let me get on the other side. of it.
That's good.
Here's the railroad tracks. Curry Avenue, that's Leah's store up
there's,
there on the top.
Leah's is right there.
Come directly across the street. These are the wings that were on the railroad station. The railroad station was down just a bit. It's hard to picture things if you hadn't seen it. It's been gone a long time.
The Christmas tree somewhere that's lit is somewhere right in here.
Oh, okay.
And the actual bike path is right on the tracks.
What
And-
happened to Shepherd Avenue?
The what?
Shepherd Avenue never really went in.
Oh,
This, like many of our other streets, never happened. Look good on a map.
yeah.
Oh no. Oh, there was another freight station on the other side of the tracks, up next to Leah's. That was a fairly good-sized building.
And right around 109, in front of there, that would be where the wood one, you were wondering before.
Yes.
No, it's on the other
On the
side.
other side.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's
it's
the other
over, it's
side.
over here.
Yes.
So it'd be facing the other
Yeah,
side.
right across the road.
Yeah, lot 110.
Lot 110.
And in 1904, apparently the post office was right across from Leah's.
Yeah. The post office, the original one.
It's right there. Bill.
Station here. Station was outside the fence. There was a wooden board fence that was here. Gate in the fence. There was a little building here, which was the post office. They also sold ice cream, and they sold admittance tickets. Because when you got off the train and came to the village for a camp meeting or any other kind of meeting, you paid to get in. They stopped you if you came by carriage at the south gate and at the north gate. You had to pay to come in. There was a list of what it cost, depending on how big your carriage was.
Could we start that up?
I think it'd be a good idea. That would should discourage some of our traffic. But that's how the association took in a lot of their money. Their soft point was they never raised the taxes. The taxes were lot rent and later water rent. That was it. And they had no way to get any more money. So people coming in paying a quarter or $1.50 for a good-sized carriage, that brought some money in. What's coming next?
The arcade. So you know, all the maps that we use in here are what are called the Sanborn Fire Insurance maps. And there's a whole series of these maps that were updated through the years. And this is a 1904 map, but there's some earlier 1890s maps. And they're fairly accurate because the company was going through and surveying these towns and villages so that insurance companies could then utilize these surveys to assess people's insurance rates. So they're nice and accurate.
Also, it shows a lot of the houses exactly where they were, even if they weren't all on their own lot. The ones that protruded into the street or on the guy next door, they were not fussy about that. And that shows them.
Where can you access those maps? Are they online?
Was what?
Where can you access those maps?
Yeah, the Library of Congress has them online.
But the company still exists. That's where I got mine from. He got some off the computer, you know.
Yeah, but the ones here, the real ones are color coded and they're large scale.
Yes.
Is that, you have those in the office?
Yes.
Yeah. These ones, the Library of Congress has these scanned copies which don't have as much detail, but they're really useful for historic research.
But at some other meeting, if folks are interested, we could put those out someplace so you could look at them. I did do a couple of them down when we were in the Methodist Church. The arcade, built in 1888, and it burned in the big fire in 1921. It had, at different times, all kinds of businesses on the inside. There were candy stores, the drug store that actually sold drugs, a bookstore, furniture store, photo lab. The Masonic guys met upstairs on this side. WRLISv met upstairs on the south side. WRLISv had a bookstore or a reading room. WRLISv also had a next to new shop for the folks who weren't doing too well. It lasted a couple of years. They never had any customers, so they closed it. It was kind of neat. It was on 1st Street. Okay, 2nd Street, if you're standing in front of the Village Hall, 2nd Street is the one that goes over toward the tracks, over toward the trail. On the right, 1st Street, you can't drive down. That's next to Jeff Max's house, and there's a couple of houses coming up. Okay, the hole going through the middle of the arcade, 1st Street. On this side of Burlington, right where we are now. Half on this side, half on the other side. They had a really neat tower, which you can see on right about in the middle, up a little bit. The house on the right is still there. The house on the left is gone. The one down a little bit farther is still there. They both went in the fire. It was a neat place. The whole thing went. That's where there's some. They think that's where the fire started in 21.
The house on the right is still there, over here?
Yeah, the one on the corner.
Which one?
Which one? Who owns it?
That one.
Yeah, it's that way. Oh, that one.
Kincaid's house?
Is it the Kincaid house?
Is it Kincaid's house?
Should be.
Kincaid.
Okay.
Yeah, the name would. I'm stalling it because I couldn't get the Kincaid
Okay.
thing going.
So
Oh, yeah. This is
here's the map of it. This is 1892 map before the fire.
the Orient
That's
over here.
auditorium.
Auditorium.
Yeah, auditorium.
This is the arcade, both sides. It only went halfway through the block. This is the library. This is the house next to the library. This one burned. This one's still here. This one's still here. Those two burned. And there was about 17 cottages that went in the whole conflagration. The library didn't. The one behind it, anything here, that went. The one there went.
The next slide is after the fire. So if you take a peek.
Bill,
Yes.
didn't part of the library burn?
The back end of the library, yes, it got singed. They lost the piano. But Helen Goddard Smith told me that they were able to form a brigade and get all the books out of the library. They stacked them over behind the fountain. And same thing happened, I think, with the village books. Some of those are a little bit burned. Who's next?
The arcade was not in Road Park, it was on.
Come again?
No, the arcade was not in Road Park.
No. It was on this side.
Right where we are now, actually, in fact. So,
The north building was like where this wall is right here, and it probably went halfway through this room, maybe to where the arch is going out. That was on the north side. There was a like building on the south side. They were only joined at both ends with an archway. You couldn't go from one to the other.
that's Roe Park there.
Yes.
Those all burned. So currently, we're right in here.
Yes.
And so the arcade all burned, and that's the library, and all these houses behind the library. So this whole thing burned, and this all burned. And you can see if I go to the next slide, 1934.
Yes.
And of course,
This is 1934.
that's 1934 right here, yeah.
What they try to do is reproduce the stuff that was in the arcade. Like the newsroom, the drugstore, the village offices weren't in the arcade. They were in the two buildings that got joined to make one on the corner over here right now. That's still there, next to the library.
There's your fountain.
Just move on.
Your fountain. I think it's.
The one across from.
Yeah, it's a fountain you take care of.
Oh wait, there it is too.
Move on.
1892.
That used to be the fountain in Fountain Square, now it's Tyson Fountain.
Mike, got the name. Where the village office. The village office.
Currently?
When the arcade burned, WRLISv didn't have any place to meet anymore. But fortunately, they already had the library building, so they started meeting upstairs there.
It was on the second floor, right?
Who you got next?
Right?
Question?
I think, where was the village office before?
The
It was
village-
on, it was in the arcade on the second floor, right?
No. The arcade, right here.
That's the superintendent's office.
Yeah, these buildings used to sit side by side
Yeah.
when they did this to it. One was the superintendent's office, the other was a bookstore. They joined them, that's where the village offices were. They didn't need a big thing. They had one meeting a year that you could go to. That was in the auditorium. The rest of the time, the village trustees met. That was private. The only way you could go was with an invitation. And that was true up through 1968. Who you got next?
George West.
George? I like George. George West, an industrialist. He or his nephew invented the paper bag. Before that, bags were made out of cloth, and they were called sacks. He made a paper bag that could sit flat on the bottom, like the bags that we have today. Before that, anybody who did make paper bags made them by hand, and they came to a point on the bottom. So if you were trying to fill it with flour or sugar or something, it wouldn't stand up straight. George made bags that stood up straight. And he had 7 or 8 paper mills up and down the creek in Ballston, and made a ton of money. He also was elected to the state legislature, and he was elected to Congress. Something interesting I found out. State legislature, his years were 1872 to 1876. They got elected every year. Can you imagine going through a state election now every year? That'd be like we just did. Every year. He also donated, maintained, and bought all the stuff to go in the George West Museum of Art and Archaeology, and it was built in 1887. It had a really grand tower that was still there when I was a kid. I got a chance to climb all the way up in it. There was a big staircase in the bottom of the tower that went from the first to the second floor, you know, like this wide, a railing this big around. That made a half a circle. Going from the second floor up into the tower, there was a narrower stairway, and that made like a full circle. It was about 10, I think. I didn't think much of going up there, but I did. Stood on a box, and you could look out those windows. Really neat. That got removed, and most of the porch got removed. This part of the porch stayed, this part of the porch went. The tower just had a little point on it. That's when it was still around like school. I went there from 3rd through 8th grade, and by that time Shenandoah had got formed, but they didn't have a building yet. So some of us went to school in Ballston, some in Mechanicville, and I don't think anybody went to Burn Hills. 2 grades in a room, and there could be a dozen, 18 kids in the whole high school.
What was in the museum? What was the collection?
The museum,
Yes.
it didn't have a lot of originals in it. George bought some artifacts back from Asia. He was there, he brought the mummy back with him. There was a lot of reproduction of Greek and Roman statuary. There were whole cabinets of every kind of wood in the world, cut in little blocks. There were some Indian artifacts, American Indian. Books. There were some portraits. I never saw any of those. The stuff, I think they closed the museum and the stuff just sort of went away.
Did they charge admission?
Pardon?
Did they charge admission to the museum, or how did they?
I'm sorry.
Did they charge admission?
There was an admission, but I think when George died, it kind of lost somebody working on it, making it bigger and better all the time. The association, the Summer Institute got it, and about that same time, cars started coming along, and looking at reproductions of Greek statues and things like that wasn't quite as interesting as it used to be. Inside, It was hollow all the way up to the skylight. It was built on the same kind of plan that the institute that Dr. Griffin built, the earlier school. So the upstairs was the gallery, and the downstairs had like one big room. When they made a school out of it, they divided the whole thing up.
Can you tell us where it is, where it was located? Just describe that.
Yeah.
Where's Route 9?
On Old School Hill.
Okay, James Avenue,
There's,
we know where that is? Okay, Prospect.
there's the labyrinth right there.
Give me something you know where it is
The
over there.
labyrinth.
Library now.
The library now?
How about the Sweets House?
The Sweets House is right here.
Where Gene lives.
The Sweets House is right here.
Right here?
Ken's Labyrinth is right here.
What's there?
Yeah.
My house is right there. That's Larry Rubble's house.
Here? Yeah. No, that's down on Ames Avenue. You would be
This,
here.
What's there now, Mike? What's there now?
Sweet's house, Rigby's house. I think, Mike, you live down
yeah,
here.
that's my house.
That big lawn that's over there. There's nothing on it right now. Except the labyrinth.
The labyrinth's
there.
Yeah. Is that right?
Ken, no one knows what a labyrinth is.
Bill's there.
You got some pretty good advertising.
Oh, I thought this thing was so loved.
If you don't know what a labyrinth is, you should not go over there. George, when he died, I think it was like in 1901, he was worth $75 million. He was the richest guy in the federal legislature. And he came from Round Lake. I think that's kind of neat. He originally came from the UK. He and his wife had 6 kids. 2 of them were born in the UK, the rest were born here. He built a house in Ballston, a mansion, that got torn down. His mansion in Rock City is still there. His house is still here. And I think Nancy Tyson and what's his name live over there now, right? I think only 2 of his kids survived to adulthood. So money didn't really buy you a whole lot. But George had a lot of it.
Bill, before we move on, was there anyone else from Round Lake that was a legislature besides him and
No.
Carrie?
That's it.
Okay,
Carrie's the next one.
that's neat.
Grant was the only president that ever visited, and I've got hopes that maybe that's going to change.
Well, it's quality, not quantity.
Yeah, right. You won't go there.
We aren't going to say anybody for releasing that. Garnsey Hall. Carolyn Garnsey built Garnsey Hall. The guy, Dr. Griffith on the wall, his sister and Carolyn were sisters, as well as Nancy Kennedy. They were all 3 sisters. And Carolyn Garnsey built this one. Her sister Nancy built the boys' dorm. This had 32 rooms, a couple of parlors, and it was only for young ladies. And they went to school here in the summer, and/or if there was room, they worked at maybe the Orient, serving, but mostly they were preparing for something in missionary line work. Where was it?
Where was it?
It's right here.
There it is. I'm trying to think.
This is
who
Peck-
lives over here?
Peck Ave, South Park.
Who lives over on Bowman Avenue right now?
The house you just stole, so,
Well-
where Bonnie Bennett lives.
Oh, yeah.
This is that's the Jones' house right here.
Yeah, Gary Jones.
Yeah, very.
We know who Gary is, right?
Yeah.
Orange house, down the street on your right. It's all been cleared over now.
Heading doesn't, it stops here, it doesn't run through.
It had grown up pretty well since the building was torn down. Now it's all lawn again, which looks kind of nice.
So it's all the trees were just cut out of there now.
Yeah.
And I don't know what they're doing there, but yeah, it's over near the bike path. The basketball courts are about up in here. Yeah, and there's a whole bunch of rocks in there. Yeah. So that's what that empty space is. That was Garnsey Hall.
There was no kitchen and no dining in Garnsey Hall. Who we got next?
We want to Kennedy.
Okay, this is the boys' dorm. 3 floors. It had room for 56 young gentlemen to stay. Not quite as big as Garnsey Hall, or not quite as nice. It also did not have kitchen or facilities to serve meals. Meals were all taken in the Orient, which was situated between the two. Can you put up the map on this one, please? Alumni Hall, we know where that is. And Kennedy Hall, directly across the street.
Where the monkey bar park
It was-
is?
No, it's the park to the right.
No, it's at,
This is the Pitts house, who lives there now?
that's where Bob Haynes lives right
Yeah.
now. Yeah, and that's his, yeah, basically it's their yard.
But Kennedy Hall there makes it look like 9th Street is reasonably wide. It wasn't. It was really, really close to the houses on the east side. The Orient was next door. The Orient was built a little bit earlier than both Kennedy and Garnsey Hall were. What? Oh.
The Orient.
It was originally called the Flowery Orient, and it was for R&R, mainly for Asian missionaries. When they got worn out spreading the good word, they got the chance to come back here. Mrs. Newman, the wife of one of our founders and the wife of the guy who put the steamboat on the lake that was called the Oradella, her name was Oradella Newman. She was the one behind building this. And it appears that she raised the money almost single-handedly. It was a really neat place. It's the kind of place that I always kid about that I'd like to take if I were building a house. This was all porch. There was a hole in the middle. So instead of the porch just running across the front of your house or down the side like most of ours do, this porch ran out and again closed, and there was an open space in the middle. So you had more porch than you did house. Neat. That had a kitchen. And I remember walking by it in like 46, 47, maybe 48, and it smelled good. So they were using it then. There were still, when I was a kid, there were still a couple of meetings that were held here, and they did use those buildings, and they did use the Orient for dining.
So is that like where the Milkins?
Pardon?
Is that like where the Milkins house is?
No, Milton's house is,
8th and 9th Street.
Park across from.
Milton's house should be here, and it's not.
That's Sheldon's house is right there.
I think it should be here.
Houses on the
Flop
corner.
over a little. I think it wasn't built yet.
And then the kids park with the
Bigger part.
jungle gyms and everything are right here.
Number 45. Yeah.
Jungle gyms.
All right ahead.
Where are you?
I'm here. I'm Dean Myers. I live in Sheldon's house at 6 Story Avenue. He's my landlord.
Your
The house was built in the 20s, so what was there before?
Before
that little house right there.
What's that? House there.
The only way we have of knowing that is the lot books, because up until we became a village, there was no record of any building. There were no building permits. You just got permission from the village board, or the association board. You're like, I want to build a house over there on lot whatever. They'd vote yes or no, and you built your house. You didn't submit plans, it didn't get inspected. So if you're interested, we can make an appointment sometime, come in, we'll get the lot books out and see who lived there before you or what was there before that.
Sheldon thinks that part of the foundation is quite a bit older than the house.
They probably didn't dig a new foundation if they didn't have to. Because in the 20s, pardon?
Do you think the house maybe burned down? Was that area?
It could have been.
fire?
People
No,
moved,
her house is right
people
there.
moved houses around. I mean, took them off where they were, put them someplace else in the village. That happened a lot.
And
No, because this is Barb Haynes and Doug Harple. Yeah,
Straight up.
that's that. This is the
Danielle.
one.
I have one question, that sign
she's
behind you that says the Orient, is that an authentic sign?
It is authentic. Yes.
Still have a question.
You can see where it's been cut on the left-hand side. Used to have flowery in there.
What's that? Oh, really?
Yeah.
Where it's cut?
Question.
That's for the train station.
One of the, when you were talking about the railroad, this is one of the signs from the
That's real.
railroad. And many, many years ago at the Antiques Festival, somebody was selling this, and we found out that it was from the railroad, so a whole bunch of us chipped in to buy it and have it hang here.
Fred.
Bill, you mentioned Kennedy Hall was for men, young
Yes.
men. Garnsey was for young women.
Yes.
And there's Alumni Hall. Was there something formally education-wise here, like an entity?
Yeah, they got recognized. When they first started, the association board tried to handle everything. The programming in the auditorium, all of the things that were being taught here, and there was a bunch of classes. They used Alumni Hall for some of that. Then they applied for recognition from the State Board of Regents so they could grant degrees, and the association board couldn't handle it anymore, so they created the Summer Institute. The Summer Institute owned all the hotels, these hotels we've just been talking about, Alumni Hall, and eventually the George West and the Dr. Griffin Institute.
Was the curriculum religion-based, or what?
I think it was oriented that way, because I was looking through some stuff today. I mean, you could take Greek, Latin, other kinds of history. There were ministerial schools, and they could grant degrees. The people that graduated from these courses in 1884 pooled their money and built Alumni Hall as a gift. And Alumni Hall was used for a variety of things, including Shenandoah Central School headquarters until they got the school built.
Wasn't it a ballet studio on the second floor?
Again?
Ballet studio on the second floor at Alumni?
Yeah, it's fairly modern.
Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe 50s, 60s.
That's where you learn ballet.
I try not to go that modern.
You learn ballet now.
Where we at?
Hotel Watford.
Oh, this was the big guy. This was built by the association. And it was later sold, but the association built it. It's like, what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 stories high. It had gas lights, which no place else in the village had except the auditorium. It had speaking tubes that went to all the rooms. It had really fine dining rooms, more than one. Any important thing that took place in the village took place there, even funerals, if you were important enough. Grounds were beautifully kept, and it had a steam laundry. And I have been trying to find out for a couple of years now, what is a steam laundry? And I've looked on the computer, and it tells you this steam laundry building is now a pub or a brewery, but it doesn't tell you what a steam laundry was. I mean, did it generate power to turn things, or did they use steam to clean the clothes with? You know, don't know. But it was a really classy place. You've heard of Captain John Rogers. He was our superintendent for 40 years. He was the general manager of that place when it was built. The way they built those places, that one and the arcade, prominent business people pooled their money and built whatever it was. They built the arcade. And they rented out all the stores and stuff that were in it. When it got paid for, they got their money back and they donated the building to the association. Same deal with the hotel. When that got paid for, it got donated to the association, and it got sold to a private person in like 1931. It burned down in 1933. Merritt Goddard told me that if you look at the north side of the Methodist Church, the stained glass windows, they're wavy. I've never gone over and touched them, but he said they had people on the inside of the church with planking up against the windows because the heat was so hot that it started to melt the lead in the glass and the thing started to go. But that was a classy place to stay.
Bill, was it open year round?
No. There was, in the summer, there could have been 10 families here. The roads didn't get plowed, the oil lamps didn't get lit, not until WRLISv came along. And not just our roads. There was a thing in Ballston, whoever is the historian for Ballston had it in the paper. A guy that ran a gas station in Ballston in 1921 built his own plow, and he plowed from Ballston to Mechanicsville in something like 3 hours. And that was like fantastic, because they just didn't plow the roads.
Faster than the village crew does it today.
Pardon? So, if you lived here in the winter, it was a tough go. Early on, they shut the water off, but then I think they just shut it down some. And I think the superintendent didn't stay here, but I think somebody else did to keep the pumps going. The Wentworth, they mentioned across the street is the Methodist Church now, church parking lot. It faced the trail, I got it right. It faced the trail, and there were gardens in and around it. What's next?
The Windsor.
The Windsor. Okay, what? That's the Windsor. It might look a little familiar. That's where Aaron lives. I stopped to see him today to see if he knew anything about the Windsor. He said he did not, and I told him I have absolutely nothing other than a photograph. Today, I looked in the logbooks. I can usually go back and find out who built something, if you just guess at the time, and the name may ring a bell. The people I thought owned the house didn't even own the house, the ones that lived there forever. There was no mention of it ever being a hotel, but it was. But we just have no information on it. You said I should call Bob Lavery. I did. He said, yeah, Aunt Minnie and Uncle Bill live there. That's it.
So it's still haunted.
When I said it burned, this is the part of the house you can see now. This is where our man Aaron lives. This 3-story section, and there was a meeting section to this. This all burned. But they managed to save the front end, which is extraordinary in those days. What year did you tell me it burned?
21.
21. In the 20s, we had a hose cart for fire department. There were no trucks, and the only pressure you would have gotten is the water pressure you got coming out of your houses right now, probably a touch less.
I have the news article from when the building burned, and there was like 3 feet of stream from the hoses. They had to set up a bucket brigade to put the fire out.
Because the first truck we had was a child's, Fred, what was, that's 26, 23?
26, but we bought that from Boston Spa.
From Ballston.
Probably in the 30s.
Ballston got a new one in 1926?
That was in 1926. The vehicle was in 1926.
Okay.
So we probably got it in the 30s sometime, I'm guessing.
Yeah.
Bill, is there any information about how all these fires started?
Tell me again, please?
Is there any information about how all these fires started? There's so many fires, but was there
No.
information about how? Or?
Actually, we're fortunate. Some tent meeting communities, totally burned down. And other ones, half of them burned down. There's one that exists on an island in the St. Lawrence that I had never heard of before. And Dom Delorio and his wife visited there this summer. And it was on an island and a little bridge going to part of another neck of the island. Half of it just all went at once, gone. And it said that was a problem because of the way we're built. They were all built tight together just like ours. And something went wrong. They may have had a hose and a fire hydrant if they were lucky. And that was it.
So this is Aaron's house before the fire on the maps, insurance maps. There it is after the fire, 1934.
You did apply for a reduction in taxes? The casino.
What?
The casino was built by the association in 1909. And it's not the kind of casino that we think of now. There was absolutely no card playing. There may have been a few people sneaking a few beers if nobody was looking, but nothing out of the ordinary. These cars are parked on what is now Route 9. There was no Route 9 then. You can see a lot of power poles. That was for the trolley. And you can't see the tracks here, but the tracks should be to the left of this car running there. What they had is boats for rent. There was a restaurant. The steward lived there and ran the place. You could buy, soda and hot dogs, I suppose hot dogs, but something like the Ardella I mentioned earlier. That was in the 1870s. That sunk later. And allegedly the steam engine from the Ardella was used to drill the mineral well on the Methodist church lawn sometime later. This is what it looked like in my memory. That little pagoda thing on the right-hand side, I think was in the Methodist church parking lot, or across the street, the current one. I think it was there. It either got moved from there to here or here to there. I'm not quite sure which. But you can see how high the lake is right now, or then. And we're almost back up there again. In 1941, Bob Lavery's dad took over the operation of this, and they had seaplanes, and they taught pilots, which Bob talked about the last time we were together. And the Laverys left in 1954, and then it was subsequently torn down. You can still see some of the foundation that's there. Where are we?
We are on to our last slide.
Where are we going?
One more? No, there's one more.
Okay. That is the Round Lake Sewer House. That is a drawing. That's a drawing that Paul Marchand did. And I didn't know it existed until Diane told me about it, because we have no photographs of the sewer house. I think nobody thought it was worth taking a picture of, but I think it does. The neat part about it is on the side that faces Route 9, that's out here, this roof went all the way to the ground, which made the building look really strange either from 9 or if you're standing looking at the end. My mother told me that on rare occasions my grandfather would take them all for a ride. Directly across the street from this, across what is now Route 9, there was a Carousel, the one that's in Saratoga now. Really? And I think kids would be looking at that, but she said they were more interested in looking at this building that had the roof that went all the way to the ground. What that roof that went all the way to the ground did, it covered where the effluent went into a little bit of creek and flowed into the lake. The Round Lake, to its credit, Round Lake had the first sewer treatment plant on the East Coast. Before New York, before Boston, before anybody else, they just dumped theirs in the closest water. Round Lake, inside of this building, there were 2 tanks that, just memory now, that were all like from the wall over to where Bob is, and maybe back to here, there were 2. Each of them had a weir in the east side. When one tank got full of solids, they stopped using that and directed the sewer into the other one. And then when the sludge dried out in the unused tank, they would get in there and shovel it out and throw it all inside the building. And they just did that up until we got county sewer. But the effluent on the way out got some kind of a treatment with chlorine. Because there was a big guy who lived in the village that worked for the association, and they, for some reason, stored chlorine up. He was picking up a jug of it and it fell over on him, and he looked like just super sunburn, but he got over it. I mean, it didn't do anything bad to him. I'm sure he thought it was bad. But I think toward the end, I don't think we had a metering system. I think they just dumped a little in and out it went.
Where was it?
Where was it? Ball diamond now, Pasquarel Field, parking lot. You're standing in the parking lot, looking north. George Street is behind you. Off to the right, almost down to where the pumping station is on Route 9. That's where that building was. There's a smaller creek that goes through there, not the inlet creek. There's a smaller one that goes through there. But
Weren't the storm drains and the sewer lines connected at that point?
yeah, yes,
So a big rain.
yes. It flushed out the tanks.
Flushed out the tanks.
Yeah, that had always been a problem. But now all of the village sewage flows down to the pumping station that's down on 9 and then gets pumped back up to the trail.
When did we start using them?
Wait,
58 minutes. 58 minutes.
I didn't hear you.
58 minutes you talked for.
Carry on. Question, yes, sir.
What can you tell us about, you guys call it Jerusalem Park?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, you're coming in range now. The question was, what about Palestine Park? We have a little bit of information on it. We do not have a brochure on it. We do have one of a similar nature that was built in Chautauqua by the same guy. It was a miniature of the Holy Land. The scale, I mean, really the scale. It was not, the village didn't do that. This outside contractor did, and he charged to go through. It somehow had pumps. At that point, they must have had steam pumps. They pumped water up, there was the River Jordan. They used the inlet creek coming into the village as the River Jordan. They used, there's a small inlet there, they use that as the Dead Sea. And other, all of the important things that you hear about in the Bible, the mountains and the walled cities, they were all there. I mean, it was an enormous amount of work to do. There is a write-up about it in the village history book.
What was it made of?
Where exactly it was?
Okay, Route 9.
Yeah.
There's a stoplight at the end of George Street on 9. You used to be able to drive straight across. Yeah. If you could still drive straight across that creek, that was the River Jordan, off to your right. And Don Corp told me that his family farm was a little bit farther east, over toward Maltaville. And he said if you hooked it out in there early, well, not in the spring, but when it got kind of dry, you could still see some of the mounds in that, but that's a long time ago. I don't know.
What was it made of?
Say it again?
What was it made of?
Dirt.
Oh, was it made of dirt?
Yeah, I don't think he made it out of stone, because it's gone. I don't think he took it with him. It just kind of... Any other questions? Thank you for your attention tonight.